Donald Trump and Republicans are going to try to steal the 2024 election. How are they going to do that? What is that going to look like? What are the mechanics of that going to be this time around? Because he's not the president this time. He doesn't have control of the executive branch. He doesn't have any control over anybody within the executive branch. And what are Republicans doing nationwide to make it harder to vote, to make sure that certain people aren't permitted to vote, and to make sure that if those certain people do get to vote, that those votes aren't counted? They are working very hard nationwide in an extremely coordinated effort at the state and local and federal level to make sure that you don't get to vote in November, and to make sure that if you do get to vote, that your vote isn't counted. And those are the topics that I discussed on this week's episode of our podcast, Hawk After Dark, which we just posted a little bit ago. It is 8:30 p.m. on Saturday, September 7th. I'm going to show you the first 6 or 7 minutes of that podcast. And if you would like to see that whole episode, you can find it at hawkpodcasts.com or on our YouTube page. There are links to both of those in my link tree. Please go check out those two pages, and please subscribe. Thanks. It's going to be a bumpy couple of months. All right, everybody. Good morning. It's about 7:30 in the morning on Friday, September 6th. I got my new embroidered Kamala hoodie on that I just got yesterday. You can find that at hawkmerchstore.com. I hope everybody's gearing up for the weekend. A little more than 8 weeks left until the presidential election. So what we're going to talk about in this episode of Hawk After Dark, even though I'm recording it at 7:30 in the morning, is we're going to talk about what would Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2024 election look like as compared to his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And then we're going to talk about a lot of things that Republicans are doing in specific states to prevent people from voting, to not count votes that people have cast, all kinds of voter suppression legislation that they've passed, and the specific things and efforts that they're doing legislatively to steal elections. I don't know how else to put it, because they have committed, Republicans at the state level in dozens of states, at state legislatures, have fully committed to a course of conduct that demonstrates that Republicans are basically done with voting. They're basically done with elections. They don't think that elections should be imposed on them. They think they should just be given power, and if they can't win it underneath rules of just basic fairness, then they're just going to fucking take it and screw you if you don't like it. And we're going to talk about Texas. We're going to talk about North Carolina. We're going to talk about Georgia. Some of the most egregious shit is going on in those states that you could possibly imagine. And then I've got a rundown of efforts in about 24 states and the legislation that Republicans are actually passing. And when you hear about some of this stuff, it's going to blow your mind. And you know, we hear a lot about how bad Democrats are at messaging. And Democrats are terrible at messaging. They always have been. Republicans are really good at messaging, and they have been since 1994, when Frank Luntz, using language, helped Newt Gingrich come up with a whole new set of terms by which to describe Democrats, and really pushing the envelope and calling them evil and satanic, and framing Republicans versus Democrats as good versus evil. And Republicans, in passing laws at the state level, always couch it in terms of, we have to ensure the integrity of our elections. Because who could possibly be against that? We have to make sure our elections are fair. We have to make sure our elections are secure. Who could possibly be against that? Well, to most Republicans, an election being unfair and being unsecure is an election where black and brown people get to vote. And never forget that Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election and the challenges against specific states was all about race. Yeah, he was challenging the outcomes of state elections in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona. But within those states, he was focused on specific cities: Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Phoenix. The first four have huge black populations. The last one has a huge Latino population. And Republicans don't believe that black and brown people should be permitted to vote in this country. And they, as we'll talk about, are doing absolutely every single thing they can to make sure that those votes don't happen in the first place, or if they do happen and those votes do get cast, that they don't get counted. And I've talked about this before. It's like, you hear people say, hear people on the right say, well, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic, which is the same as saying, I don't have a dog, I have a German Shepherd. But what they're really saying in that is they're showing a disdain for like a pure democracy where it's one person, one vote. And they're really saying that not everybody should be able to vote, and not every vote should be counted the same. Some people's votes should count more than others. And J.D. Vance has made this explicit in his campaign. Women of childbearing years who don't have children, their votes should not count as much as women who've had kids and people who are married and have families. He thinks that people who are married with children should get to vote more than once, that they should get to vote on behalf of themselves and on behalf of their children, and that the votes of people who don't have kids shouldn't count as much. So they're making that explicit now.